Hello everyone and welcome back to JS Outdoors and welcome to our new video series, The Basics of Firearm Ownership. What we wanted to do is we wanted to put together a compilation of videos basically going from the start to finish of when you're thinking about buying a firearm all the way to when you buy it and some of the basics involving firearm ownership. These videos are going to be tailored a little more to people who had either just purchased a firearm and who may not have a good solid understanding of the safeties and the basic fundamentals, or who for someone who is looking to purchase their first firearm. Now, there's a lot of information out there on the internet, and none of it really gets back to the basics of firearm ownership. Kind of skips that first introductory step, and I'm looking to hopefully bridge the gap with that. Today's video is going to be going over the 4 basic rules of firearm ownership. These rules are going to be important whether you're new to firearms or you already have a firearm, and this is kind of a refresher for you. Understanding these safety rules are going to keep you out of trouble and keep the people around you and the people you care about safe. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. Subscription is free and it helps us grow our channel, which also helps us provide this free content for people, so that way we can build a better community of firearm owners. If you have a question during the video or you need something clarified that we talked about in the video, please leave a comment so we can get back to you and hopefully provide you with some more clarity. If you have ideas for videos in the future, again, comments are a great place to let us know where you might want to see some content or where there's a gap, where there's not enough information for people who are first looking to get into firearms. Owning and using a firearm is a huge responsibility that shouldn't be taken lightly. By owning that firearm, it is you and only you that has the responsibility to know the safety, know your local laws and regulations, and know how to use that firearm in a manner in which it doesn't cause harm to yourself or someone else. Similar to driving a motor vehicle, you are in control of that firearm. Same as if you were to crash your car into someone else, you are liable for that. None of the information we talk about today or the stories we're going to kind of go into are meant to deter or scare someone out of using a firearm or owning a firearm. There is an inherent risk with using a firearm. Again, simply the same as using a motor vehicle, there is a risk when we use these tools in our day-to-day life. Similarly, with a tool like a firearm, you have those same rules and obligations you need to hold yourself to make sure that you're using it in a proficient way and you're not harming yourself or someone else. The 4 basic rules we're going to talk about today, if used correctly, will mitigate the possibility of a negative result due to misuse of a firearm. For some of the examples today, I'm going to be using this blue-handled Glock 17. Basically what this is a chunk of plastic. None of these parts move. It is simply just a chunk of plastic that is used as a training tool so that we're not waving around real firearms. Rule number 1, treat every firearm as if it is loaded. If I cannot physically see that this firearm is unloaded, I'm going to assume that it is loaded. I'm going to assume that there is a bullet in the chamber, and I'm going to assume that there is a magazine with ammunition loaded into the magazine that will allow this firearm to cycle more rounds into that chamber if the first one goes off. Even if there is not a magazine in the magwell of the gun, there is still the possibility, and you need to assume that there is a round chambered into that firearm. If you've cleared the firearm and you've handed it off to someone else, like let's say for instance we're at the range and my buddy wants to look at the firearm that I've brought, it's new and it's exciting, I'm going to unload the firearm, I'm going to let him know that it's unloaded, or her, and I'm going to pass it along to them. Now when I get that firearm back, and what your friend should be doing when they're receiving that firearm is also visually and physically checking to make sure that that firearm is unloaded. Anytime this firearm leaves our immediate and physical control, we need to assume that something was placed into it that'll allow for it to go off. So again, treat every firearm as if it's loaded, and we need to physically and visually verify that each firearm, as we pick it up and as we regain control of it, is unloaded. Now let's say, for example, I've unloaded this firearm. There's no magazine in the magwell. There's no bullet in the chamber. I physically and visually have confirmed that this firearm is unloaded, and I allow for this firearm to cross the path of somebody. I am now practicing bad conduct with the firearm because I have pointed this firearm at someone and I'm not treating it as if it's loaded. And because I'm not treating it as if it's loaded, I'm allowing for myself to break the very simple, basic number 1 rule of firearm ownership and firearm safety. I'm also ignoring the fact that this firearm has the potential to cause serious physical injury or death to someone else. It also has the possibility of causing damage, physical damage to property, which I will also be liable for. Simply by me holding and using this firearm, I'm liable for everything that happens with it. That is something that we often don't realize or take into consideration. And this is also why rule number 1 is number 1, because it is that important. Every firearm needs to be treated as if it's loaded 100% of the time. Rule number 2, never let the muzzle of a firearm point at something you're not willing to destroy. There are a couple of different components to this rule. 1 being the muzzle, and then 2 being the word destroy. So let's break those down a little bit. First off, what is the muzzle of a firearm? So the muzzle of a firearm is the business end of the firearm. So right here, where the bullet exits the firearm, right at the end of the barrel, that is considered the muzzle. And that is going to be the business end, or the end that we want to avoid ever pointing at something, like we said before, we're not willing to destroy. And now the word destroy. Why do we use the word destroy? So the first thing that comes to people's mind usually is the possibility of a physical person being injured because of the result of a firearm discharging. Now, the one thing that is often overlooked is the possibility of property damage. Similar to driving your car into someone's fence, you are liable for the damage that happens as a result of your manipulation or use of that firearm, or in the example's case, the car. So therefore, if you're pointing your firearm, let's say at a wall, and your firearm goes off, what is the downstream effect of that? Well, we have the sheetrock, we have paint, we have texturing, we have any sort of electrical or plumbing that was impacted that's actually within that wall, any resulting damage of that. So it could be fire, it could be flooding if it's like a water line that you struck inside that wall. And then as we move to the exterior of the house, we have the sheeting, which is that plywood, and we also have the siding, which can be kind of expensive nowadays with the use of hardyback siding. Furthermore, moving past that, or if your bullet moves through all of those barriers, you have whatever else that firearm strikes. So let's say you work through all of that and it impacts, let's say, a window of the neighbor's house. Now, when you impact the neighbor's window, in order to replace that, you'll have to not only replace the window, which can be very expensive in itself, however, also that trim work that's around the exterior of the window along the siding will also usually need to be replaced or removed and reinstalled, which all adds up to extra costs. So now, in the example of, let's say, a 9mm, that roughly 40-cent round that you now negligently discharged from your firearm has the potential to cause thousands of dollars in a downstream effect of that negligent discharge. In this example, we're only talking about the physical damages that could potentially happen as a result of a negligent discharge. There are also the legal repercussions that could happen as well, and usually are associated with that negligent discharge. Most people live within city limits, and discharging a firearm within those city limits, at least in the location where I live, has some legal repercussions associated with that as well. So as we're remembering not to have the muzzle of this firearm cross anything that we're not willing to destroy, we have to keep into consideration not only the physical issues that will happen if it impacts a human body or someone's animal, there's also the physical damage that could happen as a result of striking someone else's property that you will be liable for. Rule number 3. Keep your finger off the trigger and outside the gun's trigger guard until the firearm is pointed at the target and you have decided to fire. So specifically on a pistol, again, this Glock 17 that we have here, this here is the trigger guard. And what it does is it guards the trigger located here. Now, by keeping your finger outside of this trigger guard or this zone, what you're doing is you're minimizing the possibility of your finger coming across and then manipulating this trigger, allowing for the firearm to discharge. One way to kind of keep this as a simple reminder in your mind is that your finger should be high on the slide. So when I look at it from the opposite side, you cannot see my finger through the trigger guard. Here you can see the finger through the trigger guard, so it's not riding high on that slide. We want that finger up high and out of the way, so that way we have no potential of this finger coming down and impacting the trigger and potentially allowing for the discharge of the firearm. It may seem like very simple information to say, keep your finger off of the trigger. Now, it continues to happen though, and there continue to be cases, almost what appears to be daily, of people having negligent discharges of their firearm. Now, there are a couple of different reasons why I can see people continue to do this and continue to have these simply avoidable negligent discharges. The first one being that Hollywood does it. So we're watching a video, we're watching a movie, we're watching a TV show, and we see people walking around with their finger on the trigger. So what we're doing right there is we're providing a visual of how not to do this. So Hollywood is kind of screwing you by allowing you to think that having your finger on that trigger, walking around like that is okay, when actually it is not. The second reason why I can see people continuing to gravitate towards having their finger on the trigger is quite simply because it's comfortable. So this firearm is designed to be shot. And in order for it to be shot, I need to be able to use it with my hand. So therefore, the design of this firearm allows for the comfort of my hand to use this firearm the way that it was intended and designed to do. So there is a comfort factor to having your finger on that trigger. So that, mixed with the Hollywood misconception that your finger is allowed to be on the trigger, allows for people to subconsciously and unknowingly just continue to have that act. And that's something that we need to break from ourselves. So revisiting that high on the slide theory, why is that so important? So when your body goes into panic mode, or what we call fight or flight, your body tenses up, and that is a very unconscious reaction to things that startle you or high stress situations. Now, why this is dangerous when you're using a firearm is because when you tense up, the easiest things to tense up are your fingers, and then after that it becomes your larger limbs. So therefore, your fingers being the easiest to manipulate, what can happen is that tensing motion, if you can see on the slide here, will actually cause my finger to draw back, which is the exact motion that it takes to pull that trigger and then discharge this firearm. So let's say my finger's down here and it's not riding high on that slide like what we talked about. What's going to happen is that finger's not going to stay here, and it's going to start to contract. It'll come through, and it has the potential of impacting and discharging this firearm due to manipulation of the trigger. So that's why we always want to have our finger up high, because it is less likely for us to impact and get into this trigger well, and then ultimately discharge the firearm through the manipulation of that trigger. Rule number 4, always be sure of your target, what's around it, and what's beyond it before firing. So your target should be fairly obvious. However, the things around it and the things that have a potential downstream effect of you firing at that target might not be as obvious. We need to keep in mind that bullets are very powerful, and they have the ability to go through objects. So understanding what's beyond our target will allow us to know, hey, if our bullet does not stop once it impacts that target, what are the downstream effects and what are the things that I could expect after that bullet travels through that? We have to keep into consideration that every bullet that we fire has our name on it. Think of it like signing your name on a check. I now am tied to that bullet, and everything that happens downstream from me firing that round, I own. So most of our targets are going to be made of paper or paper products like cardboard as a backer. These items simply just don't stop bullets. So we need to make sure that we have an adequate backstop or something that is behind our target that will stop that bullet so it does not continue to travel and cause potential injury to someone, injury to animals, or potentially cause physical property damage that we are liable for. If we physically do not know where that bullet is going to end, we probably shouldn't be taking that shot. So another consideration is being mindful of what is around us. Even though we have our target, and we know that this backstop that we have that we're shooting at and through this target at is going to stop that bullet, what are the potential impacts from our surroundings? So some of these impacts could be wildlife. So I shoot at a range, it's somewhat rural, but it is still a very defined range. And we'll have wildlife that will actually cross across the firing lanes. And we have range safety officers who are visually looking for that, and they'll cease fire on the range if they see that. However, that is an idea or a example of something that can happen even though it's not in your direct line of sight for your target or your backstop. Another consideration is people often find Bureau of Land Management or BLM land that they have access to that they use as a area for shooting. Now, just because you want to shoot that day doesn't mean you are the only person that has access to that public land, because again, it is public. So one thing that is a possibility is you have someone on a dirt bike coming screaming by and they don't notice or see that you have your shooting lane set up. So not being aware of or understanding what's around you has a very detrimental impact if a third party decides to enter your lane of fire. So as we talked about before, every shot that you take has your name on it. So if someone's entering into your shooting lane, because it's probably not going to be intentional, but they enter into your shooting lane, you are liable for anything that happens as a result thereof. A couple of things that can help with being aware of your surroundings, even though it is your responsibility as the shooter to be aware of it, is you can shoot with a buddy. So having a friend there and a second set of eyes to kind of watch and make sure nothing's happening or nothing comes into your lane of fire, that's going to be a successful way to help mitigate some of those risks. Another consideration, and it is a good practice, is to make sure you're shooting with both eyes open. Now, for new shooters, this is one of the harder things for them to do. However, training yourself and finding ways to get both eyes open as you're shooting, whether it's through iron sights or an optic, it's going to allow for a better field of view, and it's even easier than having this confined space where you're trying to sight or target onto something, where you're now hyper-focused on that one object and you're kind of ignoring everything else around it. However, having both of your eyes open will allow for more information to come in and could be an early warning sign to someone crossing through your lane of fire. I have a couple of real-world examples of things that have actually happened, hopefully to drive some of this information home, and we can kind of see how, with the persons or individuals involved with these stories, how they've ignored these very 4 simple rules of firearm safety and how it could have avoided this situation altogether. For example's sake, I'm not going to include the names or the locations where these incidents took place because there's no reason to put someone on blast right now. These are simply just to hopefully drive home the information and provide you with a little more context as to the severity of not following these rules. So the first incident, and I apologize, I'm going to read off of this so I give you better information instead of just trying to memorize it. First incident occurred at 10:30 p.m. and this individual was cleaning their gun when it accidentally went off. The individual believed the firearm was unloaded at the time that they were cleaning it. When the firearm discharged, the bullet ultimately ended up striking a 6-year-old girl, the daughter of the individual who was cleaning their firearm. The 6-year-old was rushed to the hospital, but ultimately succumbed to their wounds. So what are some things in this scenario that could have been thought about if the person slowed down and thought about the downstream effects of what they were doing? With this example, there are multiple rules that were likely not followed. Some mitigating factors are pointing your firearm in a specific direction. If we're cleaning our firearm, sometimes it requires you to depress that trigger in order to break it down a little bit further. Now, when we're pulling that trigger, we need to keep into consideration, we need to treat each firearm as if it's loaded. Because sometimes, like what we just found in this story, is they can be. Now, if this individual took a second and paused, we would be able to say, hey, what are the negative downstream effects if this firearm does go off? It's important to know what's beyond our target, like what we talked about, and always treat that firearm as if it's going to go off or that it's loaded. So very specifically here, if we need to depress that trigger in order to break down the firearm more to clean it, what's beyond? Pointing it at a child's room or a room that's inhabited by someone is probably not our best case scenario here. So let's find the least impactful area where we could point that firearm. Now, let's say you live in an apartment complex and you live on the top floor. Whether there's 1 floor below you, 2 or 3 floors below you, there's a potential for that bullet to travel through those multiple floors. And there's a potential for that bullet to impact people inhabiting those different rooms if that bullet was to go off. So these are all things we need to take into consideration and understand before we have this act, because these are very simple, avoidable things that will make it so that you do not become liable for the loss of someone's life or the property damage that's a result of you being negligent with your firearm. So the second incident involved a sheriff's deputy, so a law enforcement officer who had shot and killed their significant other in the head on the night that the two were cleaning their firearms. This individual said that they forgot they had loaded a live magazine or a magazine containing ammunition that can still be discharged into their firearm, and then they fatally shot their significant other in the head. The individual who pulled the trigger in this scenario admitted that they, as well as their significant other, had been drinking that night, and then the individual who pulled the trigger was sentenced to 25 years, 8 months, and 20 days in prison. So specific to this incident, the individual who pulled the trigger of the firearm and fatally shot their significant other admitted, one, that they were drinking, which we should never be mixing alcohol or drugs into a scenario where firearms are involved. But this individual also admitted that they were conducting dry fire training. Now, for those of you who don't know what dry fire training is, basically you take a firearm, you render it safe by unloading it, pointing in a safe direction, you manipulate the action, so you basically dry fire without ammunition, allowing for that firearm's trigger to cycle through a firing cycle. And what that does, it's a really good tool for training when done safely and correctly. However, in this space, mixing it with alcohol and then also pointing it at an individual resulted in a fatality. So there are multiple rules, very basic safety rules that we just talked about that were not followed in this space. And here we have a professional, a law enforcement officer, who should be one of the more prominent individuals that understand these basic safety rules. Completely avoidable situation, and that results in a fatality. And this person has now ruined their career, ruined the next 20 years of their lives, and then took another person's life, a person who assumably they cared very much about. So the ending's a little heavy of this video. I apologize. Hopefully these stories will help drive home these 4 basic safety rules and provide a little more context as to why it is so important for you to manipulate and use your firearm in a safe manner. Now, if you follow these rules, these situations are completely avoidable. You do not point your firearm at somebody or something that you are not willing to destroy. You will not injure or destroy that item. It is as simple as that. If you do not have your finger on the trigger, there is no possible way for you to discharge that firearm. If you have complete understanding of your target and what's beyond it, there is no way for you to negligently shoot through something and injure or damage something. These things appear very simple, and it almost appears comical in a sense where, why are these things that we have to talk about? However, if you do not have the general background understanding and you do not practice these every single time you pick up a firearm, like the last 2 examples showed that we talked about, the results can be detrimental. For individuals looking to purchase or use firearms, don't let these stories deter you from doing so. These are completely avoidable, like what we talked about. Just practice the 4 very basic fundamentals, and then another great tool is this blue handle firearm. So they come in different colors as well, but this is a chunk of plastic. This chunk of plastic, unless you throw it at somebody, is not going to hurt anybody. There's no way that a bullet can be fired from this chunk of plastic. So as you are practicing and getting comfortable with firearms, getting comfortable manipulating them, holding them, having them in your possession, it might be smart to start with a step like this. Now, it's not necessarily the most economically friendly thing. I think these are right around $100, potentially more. I'm not sure. But it is a good first step for practicing. So find something that gets you comfortable with using the platform you're going to be using, but takes away that inherent risk of having that live firearm. If you already own a firearm, practice with these 4 rules. These rules will help you completely minimize, if not take away, the possibility of having a negligent discharge, injuring someone, killing someone, or taking on property damage that you are now liable for. Be sure to look out for more videos coming up in the future specific to the introduction of firearms and the use of firearms. We're really excited about this, and we hope that it helps a lot of people break that barrier of being curious about firearms and actually moving into the hobby and understanding and safely using these firearms as a tool, which is what they're intended for. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay safe and get outdoors.